In the winter of 1943, the war over Europe had reached a breaking point. Every day, American bombers filled the skies over occupied France and Germany. Thousands of B-17s and B-24s flying deep into enemy territory. Their mission was to destroy the heart of Hitler's industry, the factories that produced the tanks, engines, and aircraft keeping the Wehrmacht alive. But every mission carried the same shadow, the Luftwaffe. German fighters, Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf 90s, waited for the bombers like wolves circling a herd. Without escort fighters that could fly all the way to Berlin and back, the bombers were easy prey. Crews knew the odds. Many never returned. The Americans had numbers, courage, and determination, but they lacked reach. Their escort fighters, like the P-47 Thunderbolt and the P-38 Lightning, were powerful but limited by fuel. They could protect the bombers for the first few hundred miles, then had to turn back. Past that line, the bombers were alone. German radar detected every incoming formation, and squadrons scrambled to intercept. The result was slaughter. In some missions, nearly a third of the bomber force was lost. The men called it Black Thursday. In Washington and London, planners knew the daylight bombing campaign couldn't survive much longer unless a new kind of fighter emerged, one that could fly fast, high, and far. Engineers had been trying for years to solve the problem. The U.S. Army Air Forces demanded a plane that could escort the bombers from England to Berlin and still have the speed to fight. But range came at a cost. More fuel meant more weight, and more weight meant slower climb rates and less maneuverability. The design challenge seemed unsolvable. Then a proposal arrived from an unexpected place. The North American Aviation Company, led by James Dutch Kindleberger, promised to design a new fighter in just 120 days. It was a bold offer, nearly impossible, but desperation forced boldness. The British had already ordered fighters from North American and gave them the specifications for an aircraft that could use the same Allison engine as the P-40. But what they got instead was something completely different. The prototype was sleek, aerodynamic, and radically efficient. Its laminar flow wing design reduced drag more than any previous fighter. Engineers at North American used wind tunnel data from the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, a forerunner of NASA, to refine the shape. Every curve served a purpose. The result was a machine that looked fast even standing still. It was called the NA-73X. The first flight took place on October 26, 1940, just months after the Battle of Britain. Test pilots immediately noticed how stable and smooth it felt even at high speeds. The Allison engine limited its performance above 15,000 feet, but below that, the aircraft was exceptional. The British tested it under combat conditions and found it could dive faster, turn tighter, and fly farther than many fighters then in service. But there was a problem. The high-altitude performance still wasn't good enough for bomber escort duty. For nearly 2 years, the Mustang served quietly as a low-altitude reconnaissance and ground attack aircraft. It wasn't until a simple yet revolutionary change that everything transformed. Engineers at Rolls-Royce fitted the airframe with their Merlin engine, the same engine that powered the legendary Spitfire. The combination was electric. The new P-51 Mustang could now climb with the best of them and fly nearly twice as far. The laminar flow wing, the drop tanks, and the Merlin engine together created what pilots would call the perfect balance. When word reached the 8th Air Force that a new fighter could reach Berlin, commanders were skeptical. They had heard promises before. but test flights proved it was true. The P-51, armed with 6.50 caliber machine guns and able to cruise at over 400 miles per hour, could accompany bombers to the heart of the Reich and back again. By late 1943, as formations of silver B-17s crossed the English Channel once more, a new shape began to appear above them, sleek, graceful, and deadly. The Luftwaffe pilots who saw it for the first time were puzzled. It wasn't a Spitfire. It wasn't a Thunderbolt. Its silhouette was long, its wings narrow, its speed astonishing. They didn't know it yet, but they were looking at the fighter that would destroy their air superiority forever. Over the next months, German intelligence began to intercept reports from field units describing a new American escort with British engines. The aircraft was appearing deeper and deeper into German airspace, far beyond any known Allied fighter. Pilots reported Mustangs diving from the sun, striking swiftly, and then climbing back to altitude before the German fighters could react. At first, commanders dismissed the accounts as exaggerated, but soon wreckage confirmed the truth. The Mustang had arrived, and from that day, the balance of the air war began to shift. By early 1944, the air war over Europe was entering its decisive phase. The Allies had learned that to win the war on the ground, they first had to win it in the air. Every tank, every soldier, every factory in Germany depended on fuel and production lines. And to destroy them, the bombers needed to reach their targets alive. The Mustang would make that possible. The first long-range escort missions began in December 1943. P-51B Mustangs of the 354th Fighter Group were tasked with protecting B-17s on their raids into western Germany. The bombers flew in tight formations, their .50 caliber guns pointing in every direction, but they were still vulnerable. Luftwaffe interceptors came in swarms, firing cannon shells from long range before diving away. But this time, when the German fighters attacked, something new happened. From high above the bombers, the Mustangs dived. Fast, silent, invisible until the last moment. Their pilots had trained relentlessly for this. The Merlin engines screamed as the Mustangs fell from altitude, guns flashing. German formations broke apart. The hunters had become the hunted. For the bomber crews below, the change was immediate. Where once they'd looked out and seen only contrails and explosions, they now saw silver fighters flying alongside them all the way home. One crewman from the 100th Bomb Group later wrote, "For the first time, we felt we might actually live through this war." Luftwaffe pilots began to realize something was wrong. They noticed that the new American escorts stayed with the bombers much longer than expected. Normally, German squadrons would wait until the enemy fighters turned back for England before launching their main attack. But the Mustangs didn't turn back. Even 600 miles inside occupied territory, they were still there, still fighting. Reports began to reach Luftwaffe headquarters. Pilots described being bounced over Hanover, Frankfurt, and even Leipzig. These weren't quick intrusions. The Americans were staying over German territory for hours, engaging repeatedly. Some Luftwaffe veterans, men who had survived years of combat, began to sense that the tide was turning against them. Meanwhile, on the Allied side, the psychological effect was enormous. Bomber command morale soared. Ground crews treated the new fighter like a miracle. At airfields across England, the Mustang squadrons became legendary. Crews painted their planes with names like Old Crow, Big Beautiful Doll, and Ferocious Frankie. They knew they were flying something different, something that worked. Technically, the Mustang was a masterpiece of balance. The Merlin engine gave it a power-to-weight ratio that few fighters could match. Its range, when equipped with drop tanks, extended to nearly 1,600 miles, more than any other single-engine fighter of the war. Pilots could throttle back to conserve fuel, then push to full power for combat, thanks to the engine's efficient supercharger design. The laminar flow wing kept airflow smooth and reduced drag, allowing for unmatched speed at altitude. For Luftwaffe mechanics, the problem became clear. Their own fighters, the Bf-109 and Fw-190, were now being pushed beyond their limits. Many German airfields had been bombed repeatedly. Spare parts were scarce. Engines wore out faster, and maintenance took longer. The Americans, by contrast, had endless supplies and a production line that could replace entire squadrons in weeks. By February 1944, the Luftwaffe still had skilled pilots, but they were flying into an impossible situation. The Allied bombing campaign, now escorted by P-51s, was devastating Germany's fuel reserves. Refineries at Luena and Palästi were targeted relentlessly. Every successful mission meant less fuel for the German fighters, and every lost pilot was nearly impossible to replace. German ace Adolf Galland, who had once boasted that the Luftwaffe ruled the skies, began to admit privately that the situation was unsustainable. He described the Mustang as the most dangerous opponent we faced. In his words, the Mustang was the best all-around fighter of the war. It could outfly everything we had. In the months that followed, the Mustang became more than an escort. It became a symbol. The sight of P-51s above bomber formations told German soldiers and civilians alike that air superiority was slipping away. Every time they looked up and saw contrails stretching across the sky, they knew the Allies were closing in. The strategic effect was immense. The Luftwaffe, once the terror of Europe, was being bled dry, not just in machines, but in men. Experienced aces like Barkhorn, Rahl, and Hartmann were still claiming victories, but for every Mustang they shot down, 5 more appeared. The Allies had done what seemed impossible. They had taken the air war to Germany itself, and now, with the Mustang in the lead, they would never give it back. Spring of 1944 brought a new intensity to the skies over Europe. The 8th Air Force's bomber raids were no longer sporadic forays. They were systematic, relentless campaigns designed to cripple Germany's industrial backbone. The B-17s and B-24s flew in massive formations, each mission calculated down to the minute, each plane a vital cog in the war machine. Above them, the Mustangs prowled like silver predators, turning what had been once a suicide run into a coordinated ballet of firepower and precision. For the German pilots, the change was shocking. Early reports described these long-range escorts as almost unnatural. They were faster than anything they had faced at the time of the Mustang's debut, more agile than expected, and yet capable of sustained presence deep over German territory. Pilots flying Fw-190s recounted being attacked from above and behind simultaneously, a tactic made possible by the Mustang's combination of speed, climb rate, and superior high-altitude performance. Traditional dogfighting techniques, once reliable, now often ended in death. American fighter pilots quickly adapted to the Mustang's strengths. They learned to use altitude, sun position, and dive speed to maximize effectiveness. They could engage multiple enemy aircraft, break off, refuel from drop tanks if necessary, and return to the fray. This new kind of tactical flexibility was unprecedented. Squadron leaders began to understand that with the Mustang, air superiority was no longer a fleeting goal. It could be maintained consistently over enemy territory. The psychological effect on both sides was profound. For the Americans, confidence soared. Bomber crews trusted that if they stuck to formation, they would survive. For the Germans, fear grew.
The Luftwaffe had long relied on training, skill, and tactical cunning to offset numerical disadvantages. But now sheer technology and endurance undermined every plan. Veteran pilots who had once dominated the skies felt increasingly vulnerable. Some even reported that the Mustang seemed to anticipate their maneuvers, a testament not to superstition, but to the aircraft's unparalleled performance. Technologically, the P-51's success was a culmination of design ingenuity. Its laminar flow wing minimized drag at high speeds, giving it a higher top speed without sacrificing fuel efficiency. The Merlin engine's two-stage supercharger allowed the Mustang to maintain power at altitudes where other fighters faltered. Drop tanks extended operational range far beyond expectations, making previously impossible escort missions routine. Every aspect of the plane had been optimized for the twin goals of speed and endurance, a rare combination in World War II aviation.
German command tried to respond. They pushed for new tactics, massed fighter formations, head-on attacks, and specialized storm grouping to intercept bombers. Yet even these measures had limited success against the Mustang. By mid-1944, German intelligence reported that the 8th Air Force could now reach industrial targets in the Ruhr and Berlin with minimal losses, a feat once thought impossible. Pilots' stories highlighted the human side of the technological revolution. Lieutenant John C. Meyer, flying with the 352nd Fighter Group, recalled intercepting a squadron of Bf-109s over Braunschweig. "They came at us in tight formation thinking we'd break off. We didn't. We dove, we climbed, we turned, and they couldn't keep up. It felt like flying a bird that was faster than any hawk." These first-hand accounts confirmed what the tactical data already showed. The Mustang had changed the rules of air combat over Europe. By June 1944, the Mustang's influence extended beyond air battles. The Allies were preparing for Operation Overlord, the invasion of Normandy. Air superiority would be critical. Every hour the Luftwaffe spent evading Mustangs was an hour they were unable to challenge the impending landings. In this sense, the P-51 became not only a shield for bombers, but also a silent enabler of the largest amphibious assault in history. As summer approached, German pilots began to voice a shared sentiment. The skies were no longer theirs. Experienced Luftwaffe officers, writing in post-war memoirs, described a sense of inevitability when facing Mustang formations. It wasn't just skill or luck anymore. It was physics, engineering, and industrial might converging in one extraordinary aircraft. By late June 1944, just after the D-Day landings, the impact of the P-51 Mustang was undeniable. The skies over Normandy and northern France were crowded, chaotic, and deadly, but in a way that favored the Allies. American bombers and their Mustang escorts dominated the airspace, intercepting German reinforcements before they could reach the beaches. The Luftwaffe's ability to respond to the invasion was severely curtailed. Even when large formations scrambled to defend, Mustangs patrolled above, ready to strike. The Mustang pilots developed new techniques for this environment. Flying at high altitude, they would dive on unsuspecting German fighters, using gravity and speed as weapons. They coordinated in tight groups, finger-four formations, that maximized mutual support while allowing individual pilots to exploit the aircraft's speed. The combination of range and agility meant that it could strike deep behind enemy lines and then return to escort bombers or support ground operations, actions that would have been impossible with any other fighter in the American arsenal. German pilots faced an increasingly grim reality. Even experienced aces found themselves at a disadvantage. The traditional advantages of the Luftwaffe, training, tactical cunning, and experience, were slowly being neutralized by superior technology and relentless Allied production. Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs were fast, yes, and deadly at close range, but they could not match the P-51's endurance or high-altitude performance. As one German pilot later wrote, "We could no longer choose our battles. The Mustang forced us into combat on its terms." The psychological effect on German aircrew was just as significant as the tactical one. Units were constantly on alert,
never knowing when the next Mustang formation would appear. Ground crews struggled to repair and refuel aircraft fast enough, while losses mounted. Reports circulated of German fighters being chased all the way back to their own airfields, something nearly unheard of before. The sense of invincibility that had permeated the Luftwaffe in the early years of the war was evaporating. Meanwhile, the Americans refined their strategies. Mustangs would sweep ahead of bomber formations to drop enemy fighters, allowing the bombers to pass relatively unmolested. Pilots learned to exploit the aircraft's strengths: high speed in a dive, exceptional maneuverability at medium altitudes, and the ability to sustain combat far from friendly airfields. The combination of superior tactics and superior engineering created a multiplier factor. One Mustang could change the outcome of an entire engagement. Behind the scenes, engineers and mechanics in England worked tirelessly. The P-51 required maintenance, but compared to the toll on German fighters, it was minimal. Its rugged airframe tolerated damage that might cripple other aircraft. Parts were produced in massive quantities, and every pilot had access to a reliable, predictable machine. For the Americans, it was the perfect blend of innovation, industrial might, and human skill. By the summer of 1944, it became clear that the P-51 Mustang had reshaped the air war over Europe. The Luftwaffe, once feared across the continent, had lost its strategic advantage. Experienced pilots were killed or grounded, and replacements could not match their predecessors. Every bombing mission became less costly for the Allies, while the Germans were forced into desperate and increasingly ineffective counterattacks. Even German commanders acknowledged the shift. Some wrote after the war that the Mustang was the aircraft that turned the tide, a combination of speed, range, and firepower that rendered previous doctrines obsolete. Air superiority, once hotly contested and shifting back and forth, now tilted permanently toward the Allies. The Mustang was more than a fighter. It was a symbol of technological dominance and the harbinger of Germany's inevitable defeat in the skies.
As the Allies pressed forward after Normandy, the P-51 Mustang became the linchpin of strategic bombing campaigns. Factories, oil refineries, and transportation hubs were now within reach, shielded by the long-range fighters that could chase German interceptors across hundreds of miles. The Mustang was no longer just an escort. It was a weapon that projected American power deep into the heart of Germany, creating a psychological as well as a tactical impact. In the air, engagements became increasingly one-sided. German pilots recounted being picked off before they could even reach bomber formations. Experienced Luftwaffe aces, including those who had survived years of fighting, faced new mortality rates that were frighteningly high. Even coordinated attacks by multiple fighters often failed against the Mustang's superior speed, climb rate, and high-altitude handling. The Americans had turned the tables. The hunters became the hunted. The technical advantages of the Mustang played a decisive role. The Rolls-Royce Merlin engine allowed the aircraft to sustain performance at altitudes exceeding 30,000 feet, where bombers typically flew. Its 6.50 caliber machine guns packed lethal firepower, capable of shredding enemy fighters with minimal ammunition expenditure. The drop tanks enabled pilots to escort bombers on missions that would have been impossible for previous single-engine aircraft. For German pilots, there was no safe zone. Every inch of German airspace could now be patrolled and attacked. The presence of the Mustang also altered Luftwaffe tactics. German commanders attempted massed fighter formations to overwhelm the escorts, and some experimented with head-on attacks on bomber streams. But even in these scenarios, Mustangs retained the advantage. Their pilots exploited altitude, sun positioning, and coordinated maneuvers to strike effectively while minimizing risk. Training, experience, and courage, once sufficient for survival, were no longer guarantees in combat. On the ground, the effect was tangible. German anti-aircraft units reported higher engagement rates but lower success. Airfields were targeted not just by bombers, but by the constant threat of Mustang patrols. Morale suffered among pilots and ground crews alike, as the specter of American dominance in the sky became impossible to ignore. Each mission deep into Germany highlighted the growing imbalance. The Luftwaffe was now fighting a technologically superior and relentless adversary. For the Americans, confidence soared.
Pilots felt invincible when flying Mustangs alongside bombers, knowing they could protect themselves and the crews below. Squadron leaders coordinated missions with surgical precision, exploiting every advantage of the aircraft. The Mustang became the symbol of Allied ingenuity and industrial might, a tangible proof that American engineering and training could dominate even the most skilled enemy. By mid-1944, intelligence reports from the Luftwaffe confirmed the stark reality. Experienced pilots were being killed faster than they could be replaced. Aircraft production, while still robust, could not compensate for the attrition of skilled airmen. Strategists understood that the P-51 Mustang was not merely a plane, it was a strategic instrument reshaping the European air war and setting the stage for the final Allied push into Germany. As the summer of 1944 progressed, the Mustang's dominance over Europe became increasingly evident. With the success of Operation Overland, Allied forces pushed inland and the skies above France and Belgium turned into a proving ground for the Mustang's unparalleled capabilities. Every mission was an opportunity to exploit German weaknesses, whether intercepting fighters, protecting bombers, or providing close air support for ground operations. The air war was no longer contested, it was dictated by the Americans. German pilots faced unprecedented challenges. Encounters with Mustangs were no longer rare, they were constant. The Luftwaffe tried to adapt with new formations, new tactics, and even specialized units trained to attack heavy bombers at close range. But all too often, these efforts failed. Mustangs could dive from high altitude at incredible speeds, strike with lethal accuracy, and climb back to a position of advantage before the German fighters could react. Even veteran aces admitted that the aircraft seemed almost untouchable. The Mustang's success was not only in raw performance, but in the way it allowed American pilots to fight smarter. Its combination of speed, maneuverability, and endurance enabled flexible tactics that changed the nature of air combat. Pilots could engage, disengage, and re-engage on their own terms, often controlling the tempo of the battle. This flexibility allowed squadrons to protect bombers deep into German territory and return without significant losses, a stark contrast to earlier missions that had decimated unescorted bombers. Ground crews in the Luftwaffe quickly realized that technology alone could not compensate for dwindling numbers and experience. Replacements were often poorly trained, lacking the instinct and skill required to survive against Mustangs. Meanwhile, American production and pilot training ensured that losses were rapidly replaced. Each new Mustang pilot could step into the cockpit confident in the knowledge that the plane itself gave them a fighting edge that the Germans could not match. Strategically, the Mustang's impact went beyond individual engagements. Its presence allowed the Allies to implement round-the-clock bombing campaigns with reduced attrition. Refineries, railways, and factories became increasingly vulnerable, as German air defenses were forced to confront Mustangs over every mission. The Luftwaffe's inability to contest the air at scale made Germany's war economy increasingly exposed. Each sortie by a Mustang was a direct threat to the infrastructure sustaining the Wehrmacht. The psychological effect on both sides was stark. Allied crews gained confidence and daring, flying missions that would have previously seemed suicidal. Conversely, German airmen became increasingly cautious and reactive, often fighting defensively rather than proactively. The Mustang's presence reshaped not only the technical and tactical landscape of the war, but also the mindset of those in the air. Fear, once manageable, became a constant companion for German pilots. By late summer 1944, the P-51 Mustang had earned its reputation. A long-range, high-performance fighter that changed the very calculus of the European air war. Its ability to protect bombers deep into Germany, its lethal efficiency in dogfights, and its psychological dominance over German pilots cemented its place as one of the most decisive tools of the Allied air campaign. The skies above Europe had shifted decisively. Once a contested domain, they were now the proving ground of American engineering, courage, and tactical innovation.
As the autumn of 1944 approached, the Mustang's role in the European theater became increasingly central to Allied strategy. Bombing missions deep into Germany now relied on the P-51, not merely as protection, but as a precondition for success.
Targets such as the industrial Ruhr, aircraft factories in Augsburg, and synthetic oil plants at Ploesti could be attacked with reduced losses thanks to the long-range escort capability of the Mustang. Its combination of speed, endurance, and firepower allowed bomber formations to operate with unprecedented confidence. German pilots, increasingly aware of the Mustang's threat, began to alter their own tactics, but often to no avail. Even carefully planned ambushes failed when Mustangs arrived in force. The ability of the P-51 to dive from higher altitude, engage, and then return to bomber escort without refueling meant German interceptors could no longer pick and choose their battles. Encounters with Mustangs became exhausting, high-risk operations that exacted a psychological and material toll on the Luftwaffe. One notable episode occurred during a raid over Leipzig in October 1944. German pilots scrambled to intercept a formation of B-17s heading for a munitions factory. They were met by the 352nd Fighter Group flying P-51Ds with drop tanks fully loaded. The engagement was brutal. Dogfights unfolded over dozens of miles, with Mustangs using their superior speed and climb rate to dominate the battlefield. German pilots reported being outmatched in every dimension, and several were forced to retreat, leaving bombers unmolested. For American pilots, the Mustang's capabilities were a revelation. Lieutenant Chuck Yeager, then flying combat missions over Europe, later recalled that the aircraft's combination of range, speed, and firepower gave us the confidence to go where no fighter had gone before. Pilots could take the offensive, choosing when and where to engage, rather than reacting defensively to enemy movements. The Mustang allowed the Allies to dictate the terms of aerial combat in Europe. Technologically, the P-51's success was rooted in the synergy of design elements. The laminar flow wing reduced drag, allowing for higher speeds with lower fuel consumption. The Merlin engine maintained power at altitudes where Luftwaffe fighters struggled, providing a critical advantage in the bomber escort role. Drop tanks extended range dramatically, enabling missions that previously would have required 2 aircraft to relay the escort. Each of these innovations combined to produce a fighter that changed the rules of engagement over the European theater. By late 1944, the cumulative effect of Mustang operations was evident. The Luftwaffe was suffering mounting losses, not only in aircraft, but in experienced pilots. Morale was declining, and strategic flexibility was constrained. German intelligence began to recognize that the P-51 was not just a new fighter, it was a game changer. Even the most skilled pilots admitted that their aircraft could not consistently compete with the Mustang at high altitudes over enemy territory. The Mustang's dominance also had far-reaching implications for the ground war. By ensuring that bombers could strike with fewer losses, the Allies systematically destroyed rail networks, bridges, and supply depots, hampering German reinforcement and resupply efforts. The skies, once the domain of the Luftwaffe, had become a strategic advantage for the Allies, allowing them to support ground operations in ways that had previously been impossible. The narrative of the Mustang was no longer confined to technical specifications or individual dogfights. It had become a symbol, a visible, tangible reminder that the technological and industrial might of the Allies was now reshaping the war. German pilots, commanders, and civilians alike came to understand that air superiority was no longer attainable by them. The P-51 Mustang had arrived, and with it, the irreversible shift in control of the skies. As winter 1944 approached, the P-51 Mustang had firmly established its dominance across Western Europe. The air campaign had evolved into a relentless pursuit of control over German skies, and Mustangs were at the center of every major operation. Escorting bombers, intercepting Luftwaffe fighters, and providing support for ground operations had become routine, yet every mission carried the weight of strategic consequence. The Mustang was no longer a tool of convenience, it was indispensable to Allied success. German pilots faced increasing desperation. Skilled aviators who had survived years of war were now being eliminated in engagements with Mustangs, sometimes before they could even reach the bombers. Luftwaffe commanders attempted to mass fighters into large formations, hoping numbers might offset the Mustangs' advantages. But the strategy failed repeatedly. The Mustang's combination of speed, high-altitude performance, and tactical flexibility allowed American pilots to dictate each encounter. The Luftwaffe, once a dominant air force, now operated under constant pressure, unable to freely maneuver in their own skies. The technical superiority of the P-51 became ever more apparent. Equipped with the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, Mustangs could sustain speed and climb at altitudes above 30,000 feet, where bombers flew and Luftwaffe fighters often struggled. Its 6.50 caliber machine guns delivered lethal firepower with precision. Drop tanks extended operational range dramatically, enabling missions deep into Germany that would have been impossible for previous fighters. Pilots learned to exploit the Mustang's strengths, diving from higher altitudes, engaging multiple targets, and then disengaging to regain positional advantage. These tactics maximized the aircraft's capabilities and minimized vulnerability. The psychological impact on the German side was profound. Veteran Luftwaffe pilots described the Mustang as the best all-around fighter they had ever encountered. The mere sight of a formation of silver Mustangs could cause fear and hesitation, disrupting defensive strategies. German ground crews were overburdened, trying to keep aircraft operational amidst constant attrition. Experienced airmen were increasingly lost, and the replacement pool could not keep pace. Morale eroded as the once feared Luftwaffe became reactive and defensive. For the Americans, the Mustang brought a sense of empowerment. Pilots could confidently engage enemy fighters, protect bombers, and even patrol deep behind enemy lines. Squadron leaders developed new doctrines based on the Mustang's capabilities, coordinating high-speed interceptions, offensive sweeps, and layered escort formations. Each mission reinforced the strategic advantage provided by the Mustang, proving that the combination of engineering brilliance and pilot skill could reshape the aerial battlefield.
By early 1945, the P-51 Mustang had not only transformed the air war over Europe, it had effectively rewritten the rules of engagement. Allied planners now relied on the aircraft not just for bomber escort, but as a strategic enabler. With the Mustang providing near-complete air superiority, B-17s and B-24s could strike targets deep inside Germany with reduced risk, systematically dismantling the industrial and logistical backbone of the Reich. Every sortie contributed to a cumulative effect that the Luftwaffe could no longer counter. German pilots were painfully aware of the Mustang's dominance. Even highly experienced aces found themselves outmatched in virtually every aspect of aerial combat: speed, climb rate, high-altitude performance, and endurance. Engagements that had once favored tactical cunning now depended on raw aircraft performance. The Mustang's superior design allowed American pilots to attack from advantageous positions, strike swiftly, and disengage with minimal risk. Traditional Luftwaffe strategies, head-on attacks, massed fighter formations, and coordinated ambushes proved insufficient. Accounts from the front illustrate the dramatic shift. One Luftwaffe pilot wrote in his diary, "The Mustang changed everything. No maneuver, no trick could save us. They controlled the sky. We were always one step behind." Experienced German commanders recognized the psychological impact as well. The presence of Mustangs in numbers forced them into defensive postures, sapping morale and limiting strategic flexibility. The Luftwaffe, once an offensive powerhouse, was reduced to a reactive force. American pilots, on the other hand, thrived under the Mustang's capabilities. Squadron tactics evolved to exploit the aircraft's strengths, flying high, diving on unsuspecting German fighters, and maintaining the initiative throughout engagements. Pilots learned to use altitude, sun position, and coordinated group maneuvers to dominate aerial encounters. The Mustang was more than a fighter.
It was a platform that empowered its pilots to act decisively, striking fear into their enemies while safeguarding bombers. Technically, the Mustang's advantages remained unparalleled. Its laminar flow wing reduced drag, allowing higher speeds and efficient fuel consumption. The Rolls-Royce Merlin engine delivered consistent high-altitude performance. Combined with drop tanks, Mustangs could escort bombers on missions stretching over 1,500 miles, a range unmatched by any contemporary single-engine fighter. These capabilities allowed the Allies to maintain unbroken pressure on German airspace, systematically degrading both infrastructure and morale. The operational effect was clear. Factories and transportation networks critical to Germany's war effort were destroyed with greater efficiency. Experienced German pilots were steadily lost, and their replacements were often inexperienced or inadequately trained. Air superiority had shifted irreversibly, allowing the Allies to conduct operations with increasing confidence. The skies over Germany had become an American domain, dominated by the Mustang's speed, firepower, and range. By the spring of 1945, the P-51 Mustang had earned its place in history. It was a machine that redefined air combat, a technological marvel that allowed a relatively small air force to impose overwhelming dominance. For the Americans, it represented engineering excellence and tactical innovation. For the Germans, it was a relentless and inescapable threat, signaling the final collapse of their once dominant air power. The Mustang had flown into legend, not just as a fighter, but as a decisive instrument in the Allied victory over Europe. The spring of 1945 marked the final phase of the air war over Germany, and the P-51 Mustang had become an unchallenged instrument of Allied power. By now, bomber missions penetrated deep into the heart of the Reich with near impunity. Factories that had once produced tanks, aircraft, and munitions were systematically destroyed. Every mission flown by Mustangs and their escorted bombers compounded the logistical collapse of Germany, weakening not just the Luftwaffe, but the Wehrmacht on the ground.
German pilots, already struggling with losses, faced an almost insurmountable challenge. The Mustang's speed, maneuverability, and endurance meant that it could engage, strike, and withdraw repeatedly without overstaying its vulnerability. Even elite Luftwaffe pilots reported that the American fighters seemed to anticipate their movements, a testament to both pilot skill and the aircraft's superior design. Dogfights, once evenly matched, now consistently favored the Americans. Operationally, the Mustang allowed the Allies to adopt aggressive tactics previously considered too risky. Escorting bombers to Berlin and back was now routine. Mustang squadrons conducted sweep missions far into German airspace, targeting remaining Luftwaffe aircraft and providing close air support for advancing ground troops. The presence of the Mustang ensured that Allied forces could operate without fear of significant aerial interference, a stark contrast to the early years of the strategic bombing campaign. Technically, the P-51 Mustang remained unmatched. Its laminar flow wing reduced drag and improved lift, while the Merlin engine provided powerful high-altitude performance. Drop tanks allowed flights exceeding 1,500 miles, and its 6.50 caliber machine guns delivered deadly accuracy. Pilots exploited these advantages through coordinated formations, diving attacks, and precise timing, turning the aircraft into an almost invincible tool of war. The psychological impact on the Luftwaffe was profound. Even highly experienced pilots hesitated when confronted with Mustang formations. Commanders recognized that their forces could no longer control the air, and morale plummeted. Reports from German units detailed frustration, fear, and disbelief at the Mustang's dominance. The aircraft had become both a tactical and psychological weapon, undermining the will of Germany's remaining airmen. By May 1945, as Allied forces advanced into central Germany, the P-51 Mustang had proven itself more than just a fighter. It was a decisive factor in the collapse of the Luftwaffe. Air superiority was absolute, allowing strategic bombing to devastate industry and supply lines, and enabling ground operations to proceed with minimal aerial resistance. The Mustang had transformed the European air war,
proving that engineering innovation, combined with pilot skill and industrial capacity, could achieve what once seemed impossible. In hindsight, the P-51 Mustang was not only a symbol of American ingenuity, but also a practical instrument of victory. It had changed the course of the war by ensuring Allied dominance in the air, shattering the Luftwaffe's effectiveness, and protecting the bombers that destroyed Germany's industrial heart. The legend of the Mustang would endure, not just for its technical brilliance, but for the way it irrevocably altered the skies over Europe, marking the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. Even as Germany's defenses crumbled in the spring of 1945, the story of the Mustang's impact extended beyond statistics and victories. For American pilots, each mission brought a mixture of exhilaration, relief, and the sobering reminder of the war's human cost. Flying alongside B-17s and B-24s, they had become guardians of the bomber's fragile formations, witnessing the destruction of the enemy, while understanding that their own survival often hung by a thread. The Mustang's design allowed pilots to operate with a level of confidence unprecedented in previous fighter aircraft. Its long range, enabled by drop tanks, meant pilots could escort bombers to Berlin and back, a distance that had once been a near-suicidal venture. The Merlin engine's performance at high altitude gave Mustangs the ability to engage German fighters effectively, while the 6.50 caliber guns ensured that once engaged, the Mustang could dominate an aerial encounter. For the first time in the war, American airmen could fight on their own terms, and the results were decisive. German pilots, meanwhile, faced the bitter reality of a shrinking air force. Even as the Luftwaffe deployed its remaining skilled aviators, the Mustang nullified much of their advantage. Veteran aces recounted bitter encounters in which their carefully planned attacks were foiled by the Mustang's superior speed and tactical flexibility. For younger, less experienced German pilots, these encounters were often fatal. Attrition continued to erode the Luftwaffe's effectiveness, and morale declined sharply across units. The Mustang also had an indirect but profound impact on ground operations. By maintaining near-complete air superiority, Mustangs enabled bombers to target transportation networks, bridges, and fuel depots, slowing German troop movements and weakening supply chains. Allied ground forces moving across France and into Germany benefited from the relative safety provided by the skies above. The strategic bombing campaign, now fully protected by Mustangs, accelerated the collapse of German defensive capability. Pilots' accounts highlight the Mustang's versatility. Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson described engagements over northern Germany. We could strike, pull back, refuel, and strike again. The Mustang gave us choices, options the Luftwaffe could never match. It was a liberating feeling to be able to dictate the fight. These experiences underscore how the aircraft's engineering excellence translated directly into operational freedom and tactical superiority. By May 1945, as the Third Reich crumbled, the Mustang had secured its place not only in the annals of aviation, but in the larger history of the war. It was more than a plane. It was a symbol of the technological and industrial might of the Allies, a testament to the combination of ingenuity, industrial capacity, and human skill. For the Germans, it represented an adversary they could not overcome, a machine that epitomized the shift of air power into American hands.
As the final months of the war unfolded, the Mustang's influence extended beyond the tactical realm into the strategic and psychological dimensions of air warfare. By early 1945, Allied forces had secured near-total air superiority over Western Europe, and the P-51 was central to that dominance. Bombing missions reached targets that had once been thought too deep behind enemy lines, while German fighters, depleted and demoralized, struggled to mount effective resistance. The Mustang was no longer merely an escort. It was a symbol of inevitability in the skies. German pilots continued to recount encounters with the aircraft in stark terms. Even elite aces admitted that facing Mustangs was a nerve-wracking experience. Their usual tactics often failed, and attrition rates were higher than in any previous engagement. Reports circulated among Luftwaffe units of formations being intercepted before they could reach the bombers, or pilots being forced into fatal dives as Mustangs attacked from superior altitude and speed. The psychological toll was as lethal as the machine guns themselves. On the American side, pilots developed new doctrines that capitalized on the Mustang's capabilities. Long-range patrols deep over Germany became standard, disrupting enemy operations and intercepting reinforcements. Squadrons coordinated in a way that leveraged speed, maneuverability, and high-altitude advantage to dominate the air. Pilots learned to anticipate enemy moves, using the Mustang's superior climb rate and agility to control engagements. It was a level of tactical freedom unseen in previous air campaigns. The Mustang also played a crucial role in shaping post-war aviation thinking. Engineers and commanders observed how a combination of aerodynamic design, engine performance, and operational range could redefine air power. The laminar flow wing, the Merlin engine, and drop tanks were not isolated innovations. They formed a synergistic system that allowed the Mustang to excel in multiple combat scenarios. This understanding influenced not only wartime strategies, but the future design of fighter aircraft for decades to come. Strategically, the P-51's presence allowed Allied forces to conduct sustained and systematic destruction of German infrastructure. Railways, bridges, and fuel depots were attacked with minimal resistance, directly impacting the Wehrmacht's ability to reinforce and supply frontline units. The Luftwaffe, once capable of challenging Allied operations, was now a fragmented and reactive force. The Mustang had shifted the balance irreversibly. By the spring of 1945, the P-51 Mustang had secured its place as one of the most decisive instruments in the European theater. Its combination of speed, range, firepower, and reliability allowed the Allies to dominate the skies, protect bombers, and influence the outcome of both aerial and ground campaigns. For American pilots, it was a source of confidence and tactical superiority. For German airmen, it was a symbol of technological dominance that could not be overcome. The Mustang had not only taken flight, it had transformed the war itself. As the Allies pushed ever deeper into Germany in the spring of 1945, the Mustang's presence became an omnipresent force in the skies. Its long-range capabilities allowed fighter sweeps far ahead of bomber formations, clearing the way and reducing the Luftwaffe's ability to mount any meaningful resistance. Pilots reported flying over cities and industrial centers with little fear of interception, a dramatic reversal from the early years of the war, when even reaching the target often meant heavy losses. German pilots, stretched thin and depleted by years of attrition, faced a grim reality. Many had been forced into combat before reaching full proficiency. Facing Mustangs, their experience and skill were insufficient to offset the technological and operational advantages of the Americans. Even the veteran Luftwaffe aces found themselves outmaneuvered and outpaced, unable to dictate the terms of aerial engagement. Some units stopped launching sorties altogether, recognizing the futility of attempting to challenge Mustang-dominated airspace. The psychological effect of the Mustang on both sides continued to grow. For Allied airmen, it was a source of morale and confidence. For the Germans, it was a constant reminder that control of the skies had been irreversibly lost. Accounts from German pilots highlight a sense of inevitability and dread. One remarked that, quote, "The sky belonged to them now, and we were just guests, if we were lucky enough to survive." These feelings reflected not just the aircraft's superiority, but its impact on the human element of war. The Mustang's design had proven itself repeatedly in these late-stage operations. Its laminar flow wing allowed sustained high-speed flight with minimal fuel consumption, while the Merlin engine provided reliable power at altitudes where enemy aircraft struggled. Drop tanks extended operational range, enabling missions deep into Germany without sacrificing performance. Pilots could engage multiple targets in a single mission, protect bombers throughout their flight, and return safely, capabilities that had been impossible with previous American fighters. By this stage, the Mustang had also influenced operational planning. Commanders coordinated large-scale bombing campaigns with the assurance that Mustangs could clear the way, intercept German fighters, and provide cover over strategic objectives. Air superiority allowed for precision strikes, minimization of bomber losses, and the continued degradation of German industrial capacity. The Mustang was no longer just a fighter, it was a strategic enabler, shaping the pace and effectiveness of the entire Allied air campaign. As May 1945 approached, the story of the P-51 Mustang reached its culmination. It had reshaped the European air war, undermined the Luftwaffe, and provided American forces with the freedom to strike at will. Its legacy was not only in the miles flown or the aircraft destroyed, but in the transformation it brought to air combat itself. The Mustang had flown farther, fought harder, and proved more decisive than any of its contemporaries, leaving an indelible mark on the outcome of World War II.
By the closing weeks of the war in Europe, the P-51 Mustang had transcended its role as a fighter aircraft to become a decisive instrument of Allied strategy. With near-complete control of the skies, American bombers could strike targets deep within Germany, crippling industrial production and disrupting the flow of troops and supplies. The Mustang's presence ensured that no area of German-controlled territory was safe from aerial observation, attack, or harassment, reshaping the war both tactically and psychologically. German pilots, already strained by attrition, faced a reality they could not escape. Veteran Luftwaffe aces noted that the Mustang's speed, maneuverability, and range forced engagements on American terms, often at altitudes and distances that nullified German experience. Attempts to concentrate forces or implement innovative tactics frequently failed, as Mustangs could strike quickly, dominate the encounter, and disengage before counterattacks were possible. Each mission served as a reminder that the balance of air power had shifted irrevocably. The American pilots themselves understood the Mustang's significance. Flying alongside bombers, they experienced a new kind of confidence, the ability to protect formations across the entire mission, engage enemy fighters at will, and return safely. Squadron tactics evolved to exploit these advantages fully, employing high-altitude diving attacks, coordinated formations, and aggressive pursuit of retreating enemies. The aircraft's technical innovations, the laminar flow wing, Merlin engine, and drop tanks allowed these strategies to succeed consistently, turning superior engineering into operational dominance. On the ground, the Mustang's impact was equally profound. The ability to maintain air superiority enabled sustained strategic bombing of factories, refineries, and transportation networks. Each strike weakened the German war effort, accelerated supply shortages, and contributed directly to the eventual collapse of the Wehrmacht's capacity to resist. The P-51 had not only protected Allied forces, but had become an instrument of systemic attrition, reshaping the operational environment across Europe. Even German command recognized the aircraft's transformative effect. Post-war assessments described the Mustang as the best all-around fighter of the war, and acknowledged that its long-range escort capability had changed the nature of strategic bombing. The psychological effect on Luftwaffe pilots was as significant as the physical threat. The Mustang embodied the inevitability of Allied air superiority and the decline of German control in the sky. By May 1945, as Germany surrendered, the P-51 Mustang had secured its place in history. Its combination of technological innovation, operational flexibility, and strategic influence had reshaped the air war, secured the success of the Allied bombing campaign, and contributed decisively to the defeat of Nazi Germany. More than a machine, the Mustang was a symbol of American ingenuity, resilience, and the critical role of air power in modern warfare. Even as the war in Europe drew to a close, the legacy of the P-51 Mustang became increasingly apparent. Beyond its direct combat effectiveness, the aircraft had fundamentally changed the perception of air power in modern warfare. American pilots who flew Mustangs described a sense of liberation and control that was previously unattainable. The ability to dictate engagements, to protect bombers across enemy territory, and to strike decisively against a technically capable opponent. German pilots, meanwhile, faced the sobering reality that their air force had been systematically outclassed. Even those who survived engagements with the Mustang often acknowledged the aircraft's superior design and performance. Experienced aces reflected that the Mustang's combination of range, speed, and firepower nullified many traditional Luftwaffe tactics, forcing pilots into defensive postures and limiting the effectiveness of even their most skilled maneuvers. The Mustang's technical innovations remained key to its success. The laminar flow wing reduced drag and improved fuel efficiency, allowing extended range without sacrificing speed or maneuverability. The Rolls-Royce Merlin engine delivered high-altitude performance unmatched by German fighters. Drop tanks provided the reach necessary for deep penetration missions, enabling escorts to accompany bombers to Berlin and back. Together, these features created a synergy that allowed American pilots to operate with unprecedented effectiveness. Operationally, Mustangs had become a central pillar of Allied strategy. Escorting bomber formations, conducting sweeps to destroy remaining Luftwaffe aircraft, and providing close air support for advancing ground forces became standard missions. Pilots leveraged the aircraft's capabilities to maintain constant pressure on German forces, undermining both infrastructure and morale. Each mission reinforced the notion that air superiority had decisively shifted in favor of the Allies. The psychological impact on the German side cannot be overstated. Reports from Luftwaffe units describe a pervasive sense of inevitability. Mustangs would appear in force, dominate encounters, and vanish without consequence. This dominance demoralized pilots, constrained tactical planning, and further accelerated the decline of Germany's air capabilities. The Mustang had become more than a plane. It was a symbol of the Allies' industrial, technological, and operational advantage. By the time Germany surrendered in May 1945, the P-51 Mustang had secured its place as one of the most influential fighters of World War II. Its impact extended beyond kills and missions flown. It reshaped aerial strategy, ensured the success of bombing campaigns, and exemplified the critical interplay between technology, training, and industrial capacity. For pilots, engineers, and historians alike, the Mustang would endure as a testament to innovation, courage, and the decisive power of air dominance.
Beyond the immediate tactical and strategic effects, the P-51 Mustang had a profound influence on the broader Allied war effort. With the skies over Europe effectively controlled, planners could orchestrate bombing campaigns with unprecedented precision. Factories producing tanks, aircraft, and munitions were systematically destroyed, while railways, bridges, and fuel depots were targeted to cripple German logistics. The Mustang's presence ensured that these missions were not just possible, but increasingly effective, with losses significantly lower than earlier in the war. American pilots quickly adapted to the Mustang's capabilities, developing tactics that leveraged its speed, agility, and range. High-altitude dives, climbing maneuvers to gain positional advantage, and coordinated squadron formations became the standard approach. The Mustang allowed pilots to engage multiple targets, support bombers throughout long missions, and return safely. The aircraft's technical innovations, its laminar flow wing, Merlin engine, and extended range via drop tanks, enabled a level of operational freedom that had been unthinkable in earlier fighter designs. For the Luftwaffe, the Mustang represented an insurmountable challenge. Even highly experienced German pilots could not consistently match the aircraft in combat. Engagements that might have been evenly matched with earlier American fighters now favored the Allies decisively. Morale among German airmen plummeted, and attrition continued to erode the effectiveness of their remaining units. The psychological impact of facing the Mustang repeatedly, often in overwhelming numbers, was as significant as the aircraft's physical performance. The Mustang's influence extended beyond the immediate battles. Its presence reshaped strategic calculations, enabling more daring and sustained operations. Allied commanders could plan strikes deeper into Germany, confident that their bombers would be protected and that Luftwaffe interference could be minimized. The P-51 effectively became a force multiplier, allowing the Allies to project power across the continent and directly contributing to the eventual collapse of the Nazi war effort. By the final weeks of the war in Europe,
The P-51 Mustang had earned its reputation not just for its combat capabilities, but for its role in securing Allied victory. It had transformed air combat, shifted the balance of power in the skies, and allowed the Allies to conduct operations that were previously too risky or impossible. For pilots, engineers, and strategists, the Mustang was more than a machine. It was a symbol of technological ingenuity, tactical superiority, and the decisive role of air power in shaping the outcome of World War II. As the final push into Germany unfolded in 1945, the P-51 Mustang had become synonymous with Allied air dominance. Its presence over the Reich was a constant, imposing threat, and German air defenses were increasingly ineffective against it. Pilots flying Mustangs were able to escort bombers across the entire distance from England to Berlin, conduct sweeps against remaining Luftwaffe units, and engage enemy aircraft at altitudes and speeds that often left the opposition helpless. The strategic advantage was unmistakable. The German response was fragmented and desperate. Elite units tried to intercept bomber formations, but the Mustang's combination of speed, maneuverability, and high-altitude performance consistently frustrated their efforts. Even when numerical superiority favored the Luftwaffe, Mustangs could dictate the terms of engagement. Pilots reported being bounced repeatedly, forced to break formation or retreat entirely, a stark reversal from the early years of the war when they had enjoyed dominance in European skies. American pilots, conversely, used the Mustang to its fullest potential. High-altitude diving attacks, coordinated squadron maneuvers, and long-range sweeps allowed them to engage multiple targets while minimizing exposure to enemy fire. The aircraft's engineering brilliance, laminar flow wing, Merlin engine, and extended range via drop tanks enabled operational freedom and tactical flexibility unmatched by any contemporary fighter. Pilots learned to exploit these advantages, shaping battles before they even began. The psychological effect on both sides was profound. Allied crews gained confidence and daring, knowing that the Mustang could protect them across the entire mission. German pilots, however, felt a sense of inevitability. Encountering Mustangs was almost always a losing proposition. The aircraft became not only a tactical challenge, but a symbol of Allied technological and industrial superiority. Its very presence altered the mindset of German airmen, forcing caution where once boldness had prevailed. Beyond individual dogfights, the Mustang had reshaped the larger air campaign. With the Luftwaffe effectively neutralized, Allied bombers could strike critical infrastructure with minimal interference. Oil refineries, rail networks, aircraft factories, and troop concentrations became vulnerable to systematic destruction, hastening the collapse of Germany's war machine. The Mustang was a key enabler of this sustained operational pressure, its performance allowing planners to execute ambitious missions with confidence. By the time the Third Reich fell in May 1945, the P-51 Mustang had secured its legacy. It was more than a fighter aircraft. It was a decisive instrument of victory, a technological marvel, and a symbol of American ingenuity and industrial power. The skies over Europe had been forever altered by its presence, and the aircraft's impact on the outcome of World War II could not be understated. The Mustang had not only taken flight, it had taken control.
Even after the collapse of the Third Reich, the P-51 Mustang's influence was evident in the broader lessons of air warfare. Pilots, engineers, and military strategists studied its design and operational impact, recognizing that the combination of speed, range, firepower, and aerodynamic efficiency had fundamentally changed the dynamics of air combat. The aircraft had proven that a single-engine fighter, when engineered and employed correctly, could project power deep into enemy territory and decisively influence both tactical and strategic outcomes. American pilots reflected on the Mustang with admiration and respect. It was not just a tool of survival or victory. It was a platform that allowed them to execute combat with unprecedented confidence. Mission reports from late 1944 and early 1945 frequently emphasize how the Mustang allowed pilots to engage decisively, dictate the pace of encounters, and protect bombers through even the most hostile skies. The combination of skill, training, and aircraft performance turned what had been perilous missions into manageable, though still dangerous, operations. For German airmen, the Mustang remained a stark reminder of technological disparity. Even the most seasoned aces admitted that its range, speed, and firepower were unmatched. Attempts to counter it with existing aircraft were largely ineffective, and new designs never reached operational numbers in time to challenge its supremacy. The psychological effect of facing the Mustang repeatedly left an enduring impression, reinforcing the notion that technological innovation was as crucial to victory as tactics or courage. The Mustang's operational impact also influenced post-war planning and aircraft development. Designers studied its laminar flow wing, Merlin engine integration, and extended range capabilities as a blueprint for future fighters. Commanders recognized that control of the skies depended not only on pilot skill, but on a combination of engineering excellence, strategic deployment, and production capacity. The lessons learned from the Mustang would inform air combat doctrine for decades to come. By the war's end, the P-51 Mustang had become emblematic of Allied air power. It had enabled the destruction of Germany's industrial base, protected thousands of bomber crews, and shattered the Luftwaffe's ability to contest the skies. Its legacy was not confined to statistics or missions flown. It was a symbol of innovation, dominance, and the decisive role of air superiority in modern warfare. The Mustang had flown farther, faster, and more effectively than any of its contemporaries, leaving an indelible mark on history. As the European theater wound down, the full measure of the Mustang's contribution became clear. Beyond its combat record, the aircraft had reshaped the very strategy of air warfare. With the P-51 providing near-total coverage for bombers, Allied forces could plan and execute missions that would have been impossible just a year earlier. Factories producing tanks, aircraft, and ammunition were systematically destroyed. Transportation networks and fuel depots were rendered ineffective, and the Luftwaffe, once a dominant air force, had been reduced to a shadow of its former strength. For American pilots, the Mustang was more than a machine. It was a symbol of empowerment. They could venture into enemy territory with confidence, engage superior numbers of enemy aircraft, and return safely. Mission after mission reinforced the aircraft's reputation for reliability and performance. Veterans recounted that the Mustang felt responsive, almost intuitive, responding to pilot input with precision that enabled complex maneuvers at high speeds and altitudes. It allowed skill to be fully leveraged, turning even dangerous operations into achievable objectives. German pilots and commanders, meanwhile, acknowledged the harsh reality. Even their most experienced aces found it impossible to consistently outmaneuver or outfight the Mustang. Its combination of speed, climb rate, high-altitude capability, and long range made it an aircraft that could dictate the terms of any engagement. Psychological strain compounded the physical threat. Luftwaffe pilots increasingly hesitated, forced to react to Mustang tactics rather than pursue their own offensive strategies. Strategically, the Mustang had a ripple effect far beyond aerial duels. Its escort missions allowed bombers to reach targets deep within Germany with reduced risk, accelerating the destruction of critical infrastructure and hastening the collapse of the Nazi war effort. Every sortie flown by a Mustang was a tactical advantage, a psychological blow to the enemy, and a step closer to victory. Its design and operational use became case studies in the importance of integrating technological innovation with strategy and pilot training. By May 1945, the Mustang had not only earned its place in history, but had set the standard for modern air combat. It had changed the nature of aerial warfare, demonstrated the decisive impact of superior engineering and tactics, and ensured that the skies over Europe were controlled by the Allies. The P-51 Mustang had flown into legend, securing victory through a combination of technological brilliance, pilot skill, and operational foresight, a legacy that would influence air combat for generations to come. The final chapter of the P-51 Mustang story in Europe is as much about legacy as it is about victory.
By the time Germany surrendered in May 1945, the Mustang had flown thousands of missions, destroyed hundreds of enemy aircraft, and safeguarded countless bomber crews. Its presence had transformed the air war, granting the Allies a level of control that the Luftwaffe could no longer challenge. It was a turning point in aviation history, a moment when engineering excellence, tactical innovation, and industrial might converged to shape the outcome of a global conflict. For American pilots, the Mustang represented both a tool and a promise. It allowed them to carry out missions with unprecedented reach and effectiveness, to engage the enemy on their own terms, and to protect their comrades with confidence. Squadron stories of diving from the sun, sweeping enemy formations, and returning with minimal losses became the stuff of legend. Pilots named their aircraft with affection and pride, painting them with monikers like Old Crow and Ferocious Frankie, symbols of both personality and perseverance in the face of danger. German pilots, facing the stark reality of the Mustang's dominance, recognized its significance. Even the most skilled aces admitted that no combination of tactics, experience, or bravery could reliably overcome its advantages. It had shifted the balance of air power irreversibly, forcing the Luftwaffe into defensive operations that could not stem the tide of destruction. The psychological impact was profound. The Mustang was not only a physical threat, but a symbol of technological superiority and inevitable defeat. Beyond the immediate war, the Mustang influenced the future of aviation. Its design innovations, the laminar flow wing, the integration of the Merlin engine, and long-range capabilities became benchmarks for post-war fighter development. The tactical doctrines developed around its capabilities informed air combat strategies for decades to come. In both engineering and operational use, the P-51 Mustang exemplified how a single aircraft could shape the course of history. In the end, the P-51 Mustang was more than a plane. It was a decisive instrument of victory, a symbol of American ingenuity, and a guardian of the skies over Europe. It ensured the survival of bomber crews, the destruction of the German war machine, and the ultimate success of the Allied air campaign. Its legacy endures not just in the history books, but in the very principles of air power it helped to define, a testament to what is possible when innovation, skill, and strategy converge. The skies were no longer contested, they were dominated, and the Mustang had made it so.